A royal court's most trusted objects were often its most deadly weapons. This is the hidden reality behind ancient political murders, a world where the innocent artifacts of daily life were secretly weaponized for court assassinations. By the end of our journey, you will understand the dark psychological genius that turned familiarity into a fatal trap. How could a simple comb become a delivery system for a slow-acting poison? And what does a perfumed glove reveal about the nature of absolute power? We are about to uncover the silent wars fought with items you would never suspect, revealing a chilling chapter where innovation served the shadows. What ordinary item in your own home would you least expect to hide a deadly secret? The conspirators' goal was not just to end a life, but to control the story of that ending. A public act of violence could shatter the fragile illusion of stability a ruler needed to maintain, potentially igniting open conflict or a devastating cycle of retribution. The perfect court assassination, therefore, had to be a silent performance, a tragedy staged to look like fate. This is where the psychology becomes truly chilling. By weaponizing an object of daily use, a comb, a cup, a piece of jewelry, the attacker infiltrated the most private sphere of their target. They turned the victim's own sense of security into the instrument of their undoing. It was a manipulation that operated on two devastating levels. First, it bypassed the physical guards, the food tasters, the layers of protocol designed to stop a conventional attack. No guard would think to inspect a queen's favorite hairpin. Second, and more profoundly, it bypassed the target's own psychological defenses. We let our guard down around the familiar. We do not question the spoon that feeds us or the glove that warms our hand. This method exploited that fundamental human trust, making the victim an unwitting participant in their own demise. As historian Dr. Alastair Vance observes, the most effective weapon is one the victim never thinks to defend against. This was not mere murder, it was a profound betrayal of intimacy, a psychological victory that often proved more valuable than the physical act itself. The resulting confusion and mystery could paralyze a court, leaving allies suspicious of each other and the true architect of the plot safely hidden, perhaps even offering comforting words to the grieving. With this dark understanding of motive and method established, we can begin to examine the artifacts themselves, starting with one of the most personal and perilous items in a royal wardrobe. The vanity table, a sanctuary of daily ritual, could become a silent executioner's block. Among the most elegantly treacherous of these repurposed artifacts were the comb and the hairpin. In an era where elaborate hairstyles signified status and power, these tools were intimate extensions of the royal self, handled daily by trusted attendants or by the rulers themselves. This very intimacy is what made them so lethally effective. A comb crafted from ivory or precious wood could be subtly hollowed out along its spine, creating a hidden reservoir for a viscous, slow-acting poison. Alternatively, the fine teeth themselves could be delicately coated with substances like powdered arsenic or the plant-derived toxin aconite, sometimes known as wolfsbane. The attack was not a dramatic event, but a gradual accumulation. Each morning, as the comb was drawn through the hair, the microscopic teeth could create infinitesimal scratches on the scalp, a sensation so common it went utterly unnoticed. Through these tiny breaches, the poison would enter the bloodstream, dose by minuscule dose, day after uneventful day. The victim would simply begin to feel unwell, experiencing fatigue, headaches, or a creeping numbness, symptoms easily attributed to stress, a mild illness, or advancing age. There is a documented account from the Byzantine court that hints at this chilling practice. A noblewoman known for her influence began suffering from debilitating and mysterious headaches. Only much later, after her passing, did suspicion fall upon her favorite jade comb, a gift from a rival. Upon inspection, the finely carved teeth were found to be treated with a substance believed to affect the nervous system. The true horror lay in the weapon's pathway. It was not smuggled in once it lived there. After each use, the comb would be returned to its place on the vanity, a constant, beautiful, and trusted companion that was in fact a countdown to a silent conclusion. This method provided the assassin with perfect deniability and psychological distance, as they never needed to be present for the act itself. The poison did its work long after they had left the room, turning daily routine into a delayed and utterly discreet sentence. This reveals a dark truth about power, where even the act of preparing one's appearance for the public eye could be the moment one was most vulnerable. From the tools of beauty, we move to an object designed for comfort and ceremony, one that carried a scent of luxury and a whisper of death, the perfumed glove. A cloud of rose or lavender could carry a sentence of death. In the royal courts of Europe, especially during the Renaissance, the perfumed glove was more than a fashionable accessory. It was a shield against the realities of the time and a potent symbol of one's station. This necessity for fragrance, however, created a perfect camouflage for a method of assassination that was as elegant as it was insidious. The process began with the glove's construction. High-quality leather or soft kidskin was often lined with a layer of fabric stuffed with aromatic herbs like lavender, cloves, or rose petals to provide a lasting, pleasant scent. An assassin or a skilled apothecary in their employ would carefully unpick a seam and introduce a different kind of powder into that herbal mix. This could be the finely ground leaves of belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, or another plant-based toxin like monkshood. When the glove was worn, the body's warmth would activate the scent, and with it the poison. The toxic particles would become airborne, inhaled with every breath taken near the hand. Alternatively, some poisons could be absorbed directly through the skin on the fingers and palm, entering the bloodstream silently as the wearer went about their day. The true genius of this method was its delayed and detached nature. A noble might receive a beautifully embroidered pair of gloves as a gift from a visiting diplomat or a seemingly loyal courtier. They would wear them at a morning audience, smelling only the intended fragrance. Hours later, perhaps during an evening meal, the effects would begin: dizziness, blurred vision, a racing heart, symptoms that could be mistaken for a sudden fever or a bout of indigestion. By the time the victim fell gravely ill, the giver was long gone, their hands clean in every sense. Historical whispers point to the notoriously treacherous courts of Renaissance Italy, where rival families like the Borgias or the Medici were masters of such subtle arts. There, a gift was never just a gift, it was a statement, and sometimes that statement was a final one. This practice reveals a chilling sophistication, turning an object of personal adornment and public presentation into a private, slow-release weapon. It exploited the very human desire to present our best, most fragrant selves to the world, ensuring that in the act of preparing for public life, one might unknowingly seal a private fate. From the scented dangers worn on the hands, we move to a danger sipped from a vessel of celebration, the ceremonial cup. The ultimate weapon was one you never had to draw from its sheath. A signet ring pressed into warm wax to authenticate a royal decree was an extension of the sovereign's will, a piece of authority worn on the body at all times. This constant presence made it the perfect vessel for a concealed and personal tool of final diplomacy. Within the band of a heavy gold ring, a clever artisan could craft a minuscule reservoir, holding perhaps a single drop of a potent, fast-acting toxin like cyanide derived from peach pits or a concentrated extract of hemlock. The mechanism for release was a masterpiece of discreet engineering, a tiny hinge beneath the bezel, or a false gemstone that would tilt when pressed just so, allowing the liquid to seep out along an almost invisible channel. The deadly potential of this method lay in its intimacy and timing. An assassin, perhaps a trusted advisor or a visiting dignitary, would wear the ring as part of their own formal attire. During a tense private audience, they might reach to offer a reassuring hand on the sovereign's shoulder or lean in to share a confidential word, casually pressing the hidden catch. A single drop could be transferred to the rim of the king's own wine goblet moments before he drank, or onto a piece of fruit he would later eat with his fingers. The ring allowed the poisoner to act in the very moment opportunity presented itself, with the weapon literally at their fingertips. Legends most famously swirl around the so-called Ring of the Borgias, a Renaissance family synonymous with political poisonings. While historical proof of a specific ring is elusive, the principle is mechanically sound and deeply reflective of the era's paranoid ingenuity. It transformed a symbol of bond and trust into an instrument of ultimate betrayal. The chilling efficiency was not in the violence but in the normalcy. The fatal gesture could be masked as a respectful bow, a handshake of agreement, or the act of passing a document for the royal seal. In this shadowy theater of power, the most binding symbols became the most perilous, proving that in the ancient courts, the tools of statecraft and the tools of murder were often one and the same. This journey into weaponized artifacts reveals a pattern far more strategic than simple cruelty. The pursuit of enlightenment could be the slowest path to a silent end. In a world before the printing press, knowledge was not just power, it was a physical treasure, often locked away in a handful of handcrafted books. Illuminated manuscripts, with their brilliant colors and gleaming gold leaf, were among the most coveted objects in any royal library or chapel. They were symbols of piety, learning, and immense wealth. Yet, the very materials that made these books so dazzling also provided a perfect and horrifyingly slow vector for assassination. The vibrant reds came from cinnabar, a mineral containing mercury. Rich whites and yellows often contained lead. In their standard form, these pigments were hazardous enough to the scribes who worked with them daily. But in the hands of a conspirator, a manuscript intended as a gift could be deliberately prepared with highly concentrated, adulterated versions of these toxic inks. The method preyed upon a universal, unconscious habit. Anyone who has tried to separate thin, delicate pages knows the instinct to lightly moisten a fingertip for better grip. A royal recipient, engrossed in a new philosophical text or a beautifully illustrated book of hours, would do this repeatedly, turning page after precious page. Each time, a minuscule amount of the pigment would transfer from the page to their finger, and from their finger to their mouth. The poisoning was not an event, but a ritual, repeated over weeks or months of solitary study. The symptoms would manifest with a terrifying ambiguity. Mercury poisoning could cause tremors, mood swings, and a gradual cognitive decline. Lead poisoning led to fatigue, abdominal pain, and severe neurological effects that could be mistaken for a sudden, mysterious madness. In an age where such ailments were poorly understood, they were readily attributed to a wasting disease, a melancholic humor, or even divine retribution for some unseen sin. The true horror was the weapon's perfect camouflage. It sat openly on a reading stand admired by all, a testament to the giver's generosity and the victim's own scholarly devotion. The assassin never needed to be present after the gift was given. They had, in effect, weaponized the victim's own curiosity and intellect. The medium of the message, the beautiful vehicle for ideas and faith, became the mechanism of a long, quiet conclusion. This reveals perhaps the darkest layer of these courtly intrigues, where the very human thirst for knowledge and beauty was twisted into a fatal vulnerability. From the silent poison of the page, we must now confront the final, most intimate layer of this hidden warfare, where the line between healer and executioner vanished entirely. A brilliant emerald green could be the color of a slow and silent farewell. In the royal courts, where appearance was a language of its own, clothing was not merely worn, it was a statement of power, wealth, and alliance. The most luxurious fabrics, like deep velvets and shimmering silks, were canvases for this expression. Yet, in the shadows, they could also become canvases for a meticulously planned conclusion. The very processes that created these stunning colors sometimes held the key to their danger. For centuries, dyers sought the most vibrant shades, and one of the most coveted was a vivid, almost electric green. Achieving this color, especially in fabrics like silk, often involved the use of arsenic-based compounds, such as the pigment known as Shawl's green or the later Paris green. These dyes were stunningly brilliant but also contained a potent, slow-acting poison. A conspirator with knowledge of these arts could commission a magnificent gown, cloak, or doublet, specifying this particular perilous hue. The garment, presented as a gift of supreme respect or friendship, would then perform its deadly work simply by being worn. The mechanism was insidious in its simplicity. Body heat and perspiration would cause microscopic particles of the arsenic-laden dye to lift from the fabric. They could be inhaled as a faint dust in the air around the wearer, or absorbed directly through the skin, particularly on the neck and wrists where the fabric rested closely. The poisoning was not a dramatic event but a creeping malaise. The victim might first experience a persistent fatigue, a slight nausea, or a developing rash they attributed to a change in the weather or a minor ailment. Over time, as they continued to wear the beautiful garment for state functions or private audiences, the symptoms would worsen, leading to severe digestive distress, nerve pain, and a general wasting away that court physicians would struggle to diagnose. This method offered the assassin several devastating advantages. First, it placed the weapon directly on the victim's body, bypassing all tasters and guards. Second, it created immense psychological distance. The giver could be miles away when the effects finally manifested. And third, it exploited public perception. The declining health of a rival could be witnessed by all, seen not as an attack but as a tragic, natural failing of their constitution, perhaps even seen as a sign of divine disfavor. There are accounts from 18th and 19th century Europe, not of royalty but of the wealthy, where individuals who wore these fashionable arsenic green dresses or wallpapers suffered mysterious, chronic illnesses. While not direct evidence of court assassination, the principle is chillingly identical. The cursed garment transformed the act of dressing for success into an act of unwitting self-sabotage. It was a masterpiece of malicious craftsmanship, where the threads of fashion were woven with threads of fate, and the most beautiful item in one's wardrobe could become, day by day, a shroud they willingly and proudly wore. This reveals a final, unsettling layer to this hidden warfare, where survival depended not just on what you ate or drank, but on what you chose to wear. From the silent poison woven into cloth, we must now step back and see the larger, more terrifying picture these artifacts paint about the nature of power itself. A shared toast could seal a single fate, while stories of poisoned wine are woven deeply into our cultural memory. The true masters of this dark art looked beyond the liquid to the container itself. A ceremonial drinking vessel, a symbol of unity and trust, could be engineered to become a perfect, self-contained execution device. One method involved a masterpiece of deceptive craftsmanship, the Double-Walled Goblet. Artisans would create a cup with a hidden inner chamber, sealed between an outer shell of precious metal and the inner surface that actually held the drink. This concealed space could be filled with a slow-dissolving poison or a toxic resin. Each time a beverage was poured, the liquid would gradually erode a thin, deliberately weakened section of that inner wall, allowing a minuscule, almost untraceable amount of the substance to seep into the drink. The poisoning was not immediate but cumulative, a slow decline that began with a shared cup of celebration. An even more surgically precise technique targeted the drinker's very point of contact. A magnificent goblet might be inlaid with a stunning gemstone, a ruby or an emerald, positioned with exacting care at the spot where the ruler's lower lip would consistently rest. That gem could be coated with a contact poison, a substance potent enough to be absorbed directly through the skin of the lips. The deadly mechanism activated not when the wine was poured, but in the intimate moment of drinking. This design offered a chilling guarantee of specificity. The cup could be used in a communal ritual, passed among allies and advisors without harm, yet deliver its payload only to the one person whose lips met that precise, jeweled point. It transformed a universal gesture of fellowship into a hyper-personal trap. Archaeological discoveries lend haunting weight to these possibilities. From ancient Mesopotamian sites, researchers have uncovered fragments of elaborate ceremonial cups featuring baffling internal channels and layered constructions that defy simple utility. While their exact purpose remains debated among scholars, some historians note that such complex engineering aligns suspiciously well with the described methods for controlled substance release. These artifacts suggest a technological sophistication in the service of hidden agendas where the shared ritual of the drink, meant to bind people together, was meticulously perverted. The betrayal was not in the poison alone, but in the weaponization of trust itself, using the symbols of alliance to mask a final, silent severance. This reveals a psychological cruelty that went beyond ending a life. It aimed to corrupt the very memory of community and shared experience for those left behind. Even the creation of beauty could be a carefully orchestrated trap. Music was the soul of the court, a demonstration of refinement and divine harmony that elevated a ruler's stature. The instruments themselves were objects of art, crafted from rare woods and inlaid with precious materials. This cultural reverence made them ideal for a form of assassination that was not just physical but deeply symbolic. A musician seeking to harm a patron who favored a particular flute or recorder could apply a thin, nearly undetectable layer of a toxic resin to the instrument's mouthpiece. Substances like strychnine, which has a notoriously bitter taste, could be masked by the natural, slightly astringent flavor of the wood itself, or by a pretreatment with a strong licorice or anise oil. The victim, a king or queen who enjoyed playing privately for relaxation, would notice only a faint, unusual tang they might attribute to a new polish or the wood aging. With each breath drawn to produce a note, microscopic particles would be inhaled, or the toxin would be absorbed through the delicate membranes of the lips. The attack was woven into the rhythm of practice, a slow accumulation of poison metered out in melodies. Stringed instruments offered another sinister possibility. A lute or lyre string, often made from animal gut, could be impregnated with a contact poison. The court musician, during a routine tuning or replacement, would handle the treated string with gloves, installing it on the instrument reserved for the sovereign's use. When the ruler played, the substance would transfer to their fingertips. Hours later, during a meal, the poison would enter their system as they handled food. The beauty of this method was its chilling specificity and deniability. The assassin, likely a trusted member of the royal choir or orchestra, could ensure that only the intended victim ever used that particular flute or that specific lute. They could even perform a duet with them, creating harmony while secretly overseeing a silent sentence. The eventual illness would baffle court physicians. Symptoms like muscle stiffness, agitation, and severe sensitivity to sound, which can accompany certain plant-based toxins, might be misinterpreted as a strange nervous affliction or even a curse. The ultimate irony was profound. The victim was literally silenced by the very art form meant to give them voice. This perversion of culture reveals a mindset that saw every aspect of royal life, even its highest artistic expressions, as a potential battlefield. It suggests that in these gilded cages of power, no joy was pure, no beauty was safe, and the price of creating something sublime could be the creator's own breath. The chessboard was a battlefield in miniature, a place where kings were captured in play. This symbolic struggle made the gaming pieces themselves ideal candidates for a far more literal form of conquest. Across many ancient courts, from the Roman Empire to the palaces of Asia, board games were not merely diversions. They were reflections of strategic intellect and a welcome escape from the pressures of rule. This very atmosphere of relaxed concentration created the perfect psychological conditions for an attack. A favored set of ivory dice, an exquisitely carved chess queen, or smooth jade counting stones could be subtly altered by a skilled artisan. The piece would be carefully hollowed out through a tiny, nearly invisible hole in its base or underside, then filled with a fine, desiccated powder of a potent botanical toxin like crushed hemlock seeds or powdered nightshade berries. The opening would be sealed with a mix of wax and dust, camouflaged to match the artifact's material. The deadly mechanism relied on the natural warmth and moisture of human hands. During a long, engrossing game, a player would handle the piece repeatedly, their fingers warming the sealed reservoir inside. Gradually, the wax seal would soften, and the slightest pressure from rolling a die or moving a chess piece would allow a microscopic cloud of the powder to escape, coating the player's fingertips. It was a transfer so slight it felt like ordinary dust. The true moment of delivery came later, in the social ritual that followed the game. The players, still discussing their strategies, would reach for the refreshments always present: sweetmeats, fruits, or cups of wine. With that simple act, they would bring the poison directly to their lips. The symptoms, when they arose hours afterward, could easily be mistaken for severe indigestion or a sudden, violent illness. This method was psychologically devastating in its design. It weaponized camaraderie and trust, exploiting the one moment a ruler's formidable defenses were genuinely down during leisure. The assassin could be sitting across the table, offering a gracious smile after a loss, all while knowing the game had already been won. It transformed a friendly competition into a deadly gamble where only one player knew the true stakes. Historical accounts from medieval chronicles sometimes mention nobles falling mysteriously ill after festive gatherings or long nights of gaming, with rumors inevitably swirling about cursed objects or rival houses. While hard evidence is elusive, the principle is hauntingly sound. It reveals a chilling truth about the scope of these hidden wars, where not even the sanctuary of play was safe. The ultimate power move was not to defeat the king on the board, but to ensure the king never even knew he was playing a different, far more final game. The mirror reflected an ideal of beauty that could slowly erase the person who sought it. Across countless ancient courts, from the river valleys of the Nile to the palaces of the Far East, cosmetics were far more than adornment. They were armor, status, and ritual. The stark white face powder made from ceruse, a mixture of lead and vinegar, and the dark kohl eyeliner derived from minerals were universal tools in a royal figure's public presentation. Their known toxicity was an accepted risk, a price paid for the power of a flawless appearance. But in the hands of a conspirator, that background danger could be deliberately weaponized into a silent, sure sentence. The method was devastating in its simplicity. A trusted perfumer or alchemist, perhaps in the employ of a rival, could prepare a special batch of ceruse. This batch would be identical in texture and color to the queen's usual supply, but mixed with a significantly higher concentration of lead, or even adulterated with other, faster-acting metallic toxins like antimony. Alternatively, a set of exquisite kohl pencils presented as a gift from an admiring ambassador could have their cores infused with a poisonous compound. The plot then unfolded with a terrible intimacy. Each morning, as the royal attendant or the queen herself performed the sacred ritual of applying her public face, she would unknowingly paint a layer of poison directly onto her skin. The absorption was slow, cumulative, and utterly hidden. The early symptoms were subtle and tragically easy to dismiss: a slight pallor beyond the makeup itself, a lingering fatigue, perhaps a mild ache in the joints. These were the burdens of court life, the signs of stress or a passing chill. But as weeks turned into months, the effects would deepen. Hair might begin to thin and fall out. Digestive troubles would become chronic. A gradual neurological decline could manifest as forgetfulness or irritability, traits that a rival could easily frame as personal failings rather than evidence of attack. The illness perfectly mimicked the wasting diseases of the era, providing the assassin with perfect biological camouflage. The true horror of this method lay in its psychological dimension. It weaponized the immense societal pressure to maintain a flawless royal image. To stop using the makeup was to appear weak, ill, or disrespectful of court ceremony. The victim, in her dedication to her role and her status, became an active participant in her own decline, applying the agent of her demise with her own hand, day after day. Historical records from places like ancient Rome and Elizabethan England are filled with accounts of aristocrats suffering from mysterious ailments that modern analysis often attributes to their cosmetic regimens. While not all were acts of murder, the pattern reveals a vulnerability that a cunning enemy would have been quick to exploit. A plot like this was almost impossible to trace. The poison was not in a single meal or drink, but in a pot used up and replaced, its evidence literally washed away each night. It transformed the pursuit of perfection into a slow, invisible prison, proving that in the theater of power, even the face one showed to the world could become a mask that concealed a fatal truth. A single pointed gesture could end a debate forever. In the chambers of power where words were law and treaties were drawn, the writing stylus was an extension of the mind. This simple metal tool, used for inscribing wax tablets or making notations on parchment, was a personal instrument of statecraft carried by advisors and rulers alike. Its very purpose to mark, to correct, to clarify made it the perfect vehicle for a final, silent edit. An assassin with access to a metalsmith could commission a stylus that appeared utterly ordinary, yet concealed a tiny, deadly innovation. One method involved hollowing out the stylus shaft to create a minute reservoir for a fast-acting toxin, with a nearly invisible needle tip that would extend with the slightest pressure. Another, more direct approach was to simply coat the existing metal point with a concentrated contact poison, like the venom of certain snakes or a potent botanical extract, allowing it to dry clear. The attack was a masterpiece of timing and theater. It required the assassin to be close, often in a moment of feigned collaboration or intense discussion. Picture a war council with a general and his advisor leaning over a map spread on a heavy oak table. The advisor, holding his stylus, points to a strategic mountain pass. In doing so, he allows the tip to briefly and seemingly accidentally brush against the back of the general's hand, or perhaps during a private audience while reviewing a clause in a treaty on a wax tablet. The advisor makes a correction with his own stylus, then gestures for the king to see, the tool's point coming perilously close to the ruler's finger. The contact would be fleeting, the prick so fine it would feel like the bite of a thorn or the scratch from a rough parchment edge. The victim might flinch slightly, dismiss it, and the conversation would continue. The true weapon, however, had already been delivered. Deniability was woven into the act itself. The stylus was not a concealed dagger, it was an open, functional object. If questioned, the attacker could express profound regret for a clumsy accident, even offering his own stylus for inspection, a stylus that, after that one use, might have no visible trace of its payload. The poison's work would begin hours later, with symptoms that could resemble a sudden, severe fever or a catastrophic failure of the heart. In a time before understanding of germs or advanced toxicology, such a passing would often be recorded as a tragic, natural event, a stroke or a fit. This method blurred the line between scholarly debate and silent execution, transforming the very tool used to record history into an instrument for ending it. It exploited the intimacy of shared work and intellectual pursuit, turning a moment of focused collaboration into a vector for betrayal. The lesson is chilling. In the ancient courts, even the act of pointing the way forward could be the last gesture you ever made. The search for eternal life could produce the perfect means to end one. Behind the chilling ingenuity of these weaponized artifacts lay a quiet revolution in human understanding, the shadowy world of alchemy and early chemistry. These proto-scientists, often cloistered in royal workshops or private laboratories, were not merely dreamers chasing mythical gold. They were the era's foremost experts on the hidden properties of matter, and their discoveries became the raw materials for the court's silent wars. While their public goal was the transmutation of metals or the creation of the elixir of life, their private notebooks contained something far more immediately valuable to their patrons: meticulous recipes for substances that could mimic illness, induce a deep sleep, or bring about a quiet, untimely conclusion. The royal court was both their greatest patron and their most dangerous client. A king or queen would fund an alchemist's work, providing rare minerals, exotic plants from distant lands, and the space to conduct their often perilous experiments. In return, the alchemist offered more than the promise of gold. They offered a new kind of power, knowledge. They learned how to distill the essence of a poisonous plant into a clear, odorless liquid. They discovered which metallic compounds could dissolve without a trace in wine, and which left a telltale residue. They perfected methods of concentrating toxins to such a degree that a single drop, smaller than a tear, could be fatal. This knowledge was recorded in coded language, a blend of mystical symbols and precise instructions, guarded as fiercely as any state secret. These texts sometimes referred to their creations with darkly euphemistic names like inheritance powders or succession solutions, terms that spoke volumes about their intended use. The relationship was a Faustian bargain. The alchemist gained protection, resources, and status, while the ruler gained access to a form of warfare that was deniable, precise, and terrifyingly modern. A breakthrough in glassware that allowed for better distillation wasn't just a step toward purer spirits, it was a step toward purer, more undetectable poisons. An improved understanding of solubility meant a toxin could now be baked into a pastry or sealed within the wax of a document seal without altering its taste or appearance. This marriage of early scientific method and political ambition provided the essential technical foundation for everything we've explored. It was the alchemist who might advise on treating a comb's teeth with a resin of wolfsbane, or who could formulate a perfume that carried a scent of jasmine and a whisper of belladonna. Their work transformed assassination from a brutal act of force into a clinical application of chemistry, where the weapon was not the knife, but the knowledge itself. This reveals a profound and unsettling irony: humanity's drive to understand and master the natural world, a drive that would eventually lead to medicine and modern science, was first harnessed in these shadowed chambers to serve the oldest human impulses of power and betrayal. The quest to unlock the secrets of creation was simultaneously funding a quiet industry of destruction. The official record states Prince Mirza Muhammad Hakim passed from a sudden fever in the year 1585. He was a young man, a brother to the great Mughal Emperor Akbar, and his loss was noted with the formal brevity of court chronicles. Yet, alongside that sterile entry, another story persisted in whispers, a tale not of illness but of a gift. It was said a nobleman, seeking favor or perhaps sowing discord, presented the prince with a shawl of legendary fineness, woven in the distant, verdant valleys of Kashmir. This was no ordinary garment. It was described as impossibly soft, dyed a deep, mesmerizing blue, a treasure meant to be worn against the skin, a constant symbol of luxury and esteem. The prince, it is told, cherished it, draping it over his shoulders during private audiences and cool evening walks in the palace gardens. He was rarely seen without it. Then the changes began. First came a persistent, itching rash across his neck and shoulders where the fabric lay. Then followed episodes of dizziness, tremors in his hands, and a creeping confusion that alarmed his attendants. Within months, the vibrant prince was gone, his decline as swift as it was mysterious. Later, historians examining the anecdotal accounts have pieced together a chilling hypothesis. The magnificent shawl, they suggest, may have been more than a gift. The lush region of Kashmir was known not just for its textiles, but for its diverse and potent flora. Local dyers, in their quest for deep, fast colors, sometimes used plants with toxic properties. A conspirator with knowledge of these practices could have commissioned a shawl deliberately dyed with extracts from poisonous species, perhaps datura or a similar neurotoxic plant. The toxin would not need to be ingested. Body heat and perspiration could leach the chemical from the fibers, allowing it to be absorbed directly through the prince's skin, dose by daily dose, every time he wrapped himself in the symbol of his own status. This case distills the psychological cruelty of these methods into a single, haunting image. The attack exploited the victim's pride and comfort, turning his own taste for the finest things into a fatal vulnerability. He would have felt the softness, admired the color, accepted the admiration it drew, all while the agent of his demise rested gently on his shoulders. But the legacy of such an act extends beyond the individual tragedy. It permanently clouds the historical record. For centuries, the prince's passing was simply a note of misfortune, a young life claimed by the era's ever-present health challenges. The whispered truth, if it is truth, reframes that entire narrative. It suggests not fate, but a deliberate, silent coup, a political maneuver erased by the perfect camouflage of an everyday artifact. This is perhaps the ultimate goal of such weaponization, to not only remove an obstacle but to erase the very evidence of the crime, leaving history to debate a fever while the truth, woven into a beautiful, cursed fabric, quietly disintegrates with time. A shawl could be a death sentence, but a single sip of wine might be perfectly safe. This was the maddening paradox facing every ruler who understood the silent war being waged with everyday objects. The threat was no longer just in their cup, but on their skin, in their hair, and on the very pages they read. How do you guard against a danger that has no fixed form? The response was a sprawling, often paranoid, system of defense that reshaped the very rituals of court life. The most famous of these countermeasures was, of course, the royal food taster. This individual, often a trusted servant of lower rank, would consume a portion of every dish and drink before it reached the sovereign's lips. It was a grim lottery of loyalty, a human shield against the most direct method of poisoning. Yet, as we have seen, this was a tragically incomplete solution. A taster sipping wine from a double-walled goblet would be fine, but the king who drank from it an hour later might not be. A taster sampling a sweet pastry would show no ill effects, but the queen who handled a poisoned gaming piece before eating it would succumb. The poison was often in the pathway, not the meal itself. This limitation bred even more elaborate rituals. Royals employed officials known as spooners, whose sole duty was to taste not the food, but the utensils, licking the spoons and forks to detect any residue of contact poison. The presentation of a gift, especially a personal item like a garment, a book, or a piece of jewelry, became a tense ceremonial dance. A donor might be required to wear the new gloves for a week, or read from the illuminated manuscript for hours in the presence of guards before it could be deemed safe for royal use. This turned generosity into a public test of faith, where the giver literally had to risk their own life to prove their goodwill. Beyond ritual, courts began to actively patronize a new kind of scholar, the physician toxicologist. These men were the early forensic scientists, studying the effects of various substances, developing primitive antidotes, and examining the remains of those who died under suspicious circumstances. They would test fabrics for strange dyes, inspect metalwork for hidden compartments, and analyze bodily fluids for signs of metallic poisons. Their work was a direct scientific arms race against the alchemists in the employ of rivals. The cumulative effect of all this was a profound transformation of the court's atmosphere. Every interaction was shadowed by unspoken suspicion. A compliment on a new ring could be interpreted as a probe for information about its origin. A servant adjusting a ruler's cloak was watched with hawk-like intensity. Trust, the fundamental glue of any society, became the rarest and most precious commodity. This pervasive dread was not merely a side effect, it was, in many ways, the point. A savvy ruler could weaponize this culture of paranoia to their own advantage. By fostering an environment where everyone was potentially guilty, they could keep factions divided, discourage close alliances between courtiers, and maintain a terrifying level of control. The constant, low-grade fear of invisible assassination became a tool of statecraft, ensuring that the court's attention remained fixed on the monarch's survival, and by extension, their absolute power. The defenses erected against silent weapons thus created their own silent prison, one where safety was purchased at the price of ever-present dread, proving that sometimes the most lasting damage is not done by the poison, but by the fear of it. The boudoir was a sanctuary of silk and scent, and one of the most potent arsenals in the silent war. Within the private chambers of royalty, where guards rarely tread and political masks were set aside, women moved with an access and intimacy granted to few others. As ladies-in-waiting, trusted companions, or rival queens, their domain was the wardrobe, the vanity, and the jewel case, spaces brimming with the very artifacts we have explored. This proximity granted them a unique and devastating form of agency, one that historical narratives have often overlooked or deliberately softened. While chronicles might celebrate male generals for battlefield conquests, they frequently attributed poisonings to vague forces or anonymous plots, a tendency that sometimes obscured the highly strategic hands that carried them out. A woman adjusting a rival's headdress could secure a toxin-treated hairpin with a gentle touch. A queen, under the guise of sisterly affection, could bestow a beautifully dyed shawl or a pair of perfumed gloves upon a courtier she viewed as a threat. These acts required no physical strength, only patience, precise knowledge, and a deep understanding of human vulnerability. The very societal perception that cast women as less politically threatening became their greatest tactical advantage. Suspicion naturally fell first on obvious rivals, ambitious generals, or foreign ambassadors. The idea that a gentle hand smoothing a pillow or selecting a necklace could be executing a long-term political strategy was a cognitive blind spot for many, allowing female agents to operate with a chilling degree of impunity. This reveals a hidden and complex stratum of ancient power dynamics. The domestic sphere, often dismissed as separate from the affairs of state, was in fact a critical front line. The tools of beauty, care, and presentation were seamlessly repurposed into tools of influence and, when necessary, silent removal. It reframes our understanding of political history, suggesting that some of the most decisive maneuvers were not declared in council chambers but whispered in dressing rooms, and that some of the era's most effective power brokers wielded not a scepter, but a scent bottle or a sewing needle. This silent, intimate form of conflict ensured that the battlefield was everywhere, and that sometimes the most dangerous weapon was the one offered with a sympathetic smile. This silent arms race reveals a disturbing truth about the nature of power itself. When a society systematically turns its everyday objects into hidden weapons, it is not merely adopting a new tactic, it is broadcasting a fundamental value. In these ancient courts, overt violence was seen as crude, destabilizing, and politically dangerous. It could spark rebellion or invite foreign intervention. Covert violence, however, delivered through a comb or a cup, was something else entirely. It was a tolerated, even an institutionalized tool of statecraft. This created a chilling ethical framework where the act of murder was not the greatest sin, but getting caught was. Success was measured not in battlefield glory, but in the perfect staging of a tragedy that everyone would accept as fate. The system commodified trust, turning it from a social bond into a currency to be spent or weaponized. A gift was no longer an expression of goodwill. It was a probe, a test, or a trap. A shared meal became a tense ritual of observation. Every gesture of kindness carried a hidden question, and every object of beauty held a potential secret. This environment reshaped human relationships at the most basic level, fostering a paranoia that was, ironically, essential for survival. Philosophically, this hidden history challenges a comforting narrative of linear human progress. We often like to view history as a march toward greater enlightenment, where our ingenuity is consistently applied to solving problems and improving life. Yet here, in these gilded halls, we see the same brilliant minds, the same drive for innovation, being channeled with equal fervor into the art of concealed destruction. The alchemist seeking an elixir for eternal life might, in the next moment, perfect a tasteless poison. The artisan mastering a new dye for a royal robe could also be engineering a way to seal a toxin within its fibers. This duality forces us to acknowledge that technological and intellectual advancement is morally neutral, a tool that amplifies both our capacity for creation and our capacity for cruelty. It holds up a dark mirror to our own time, prompting an uncomfortable question. In our relentless pursuit of security, convenience, and influence, what ordinary, trusted aspects of our own lives are we rendering vulnerable? We surround ourselves with interconnected devices, ingest supplements for wellness, and welcome biometric scanners into our homes, all in the name of progress and protection. The lesson from the past is not that these things are inherently dangerous, but that any system, any tool, any object of trust can be perverted when the incentive is great enough. The silent wars of the ancient court remind us that the greatest threats are rarely the obvious ones. They are the ones that look like gifts, feel like comfort, and operate under the guise of normalcy, teaching us that vigilance is not just about guarding against the stranger in the shadows, but about understanding the profound power we grant to the familiar objects we invite into our hands each and every day. The whispers of history are now being given a voice by modern science. For generations, these accounts of weaponized artifacts were relegated to the shadowy realm of court gossip and dramatic legend, stories perhaps exaggerated by time and fear. But what if the paranoia was justified? Today, a powerful alliance between archaeology and forensic chemistry is sifting through the dust of ages, uncovering physical evidence that suggests these silent wars were very real. The proof is no longer just in the parchment, but in the residue. Advanced techniques like X-ray fluorescence and mass spectrometry allow scientists to perform a kind of chemical autopsy on ancient objects without damaging them. A seemingly innocent ceramic jug from a Roman villa, for instance, might be scanned and reveal trace signatures of alkaloid poisons derived from plants like belladonna, still clinging to its inner surface centuries after the last drop was poured. These are not the obvious residues of everyday medicines, which had their own distinct profiles, but indicators of substances known for their potent and targeted effects. Beyond residue, the very construction of artifacts is yielding secrets. Microscopic examination and high-resolution imaging have revealed anomalies in items long held in museum collections. A signet ring, once thought solid, might show a hairline seam under magnification, suggesting a now empty compartment. The internal structure of an ornate drinking horn, when viewed with CT scanning technology, could display baffling internal channels that serve no purpose for drinking but align perfectly with a method for mixing or separating liquids. This is where the detective work of material science meets the hints in old texts. Researchers cross-reference these physical findings with symptoms described in ancient medical scrolls or court physicians' reports. A chronicle might detail a noble suffering from tremors, hallucinations, and a creeping paralysis, a list that modern toxicologists recognize as a textbook case of certain plant-based poisonings. When such a description exists alongside the archaeological discovery of a contaminated vessel in that same historical context, the circumstantial case becomes powerfully strong. It is true that a definitive smoking gun is exceptionally rare. The organic materials favored for these plots, the poisons themselves, the treated fabrics and leathers, are often the first to decay. A hollow hairpin might be found, but its toxic payload vanished a millennium ago. This ephemeral nature is precisely what made the methods so effective in their time and so challenging to prove now. Yet the cumulative weight of evidence is forming a compelling mosaic. Each tiny data point, a chemical signature here, an engineered flaw there, a corroborating symptom described elsewhere, builds toward a sobering conclusion. The tales were not mere fantasy. They were born from a genuine, terrifying chemical reality that the ancients understood and exploited with chilling ingenuity. This scientific validation does more than confirm historical rumors. It reframes our entire understanding of the past. It tells us that the greatest threats were often invisible, and that the most enduring conflicts left their faintest, most poisonous traces in the most ordinary of places. The ghost of a poisoned king haunts our greatest stories, whispering a warning across the centuries. When Shakespeare's Hamlet dies from a blade tipped with a deadly substance, or when Snow White falls into a slumber after touching a beautiful comb, these are not just clever plot twists. They are cultural echoes, reverberations of a genuine historical terror that once permeated the very air of power. These narratives function as a kind of collective memory, preserving the psychological landscape of an era where trust was a luxury and the familiar was a potential trap. The poisoned object, as a literary device, is so enduring precisely because it taps into a fundamental human anxiety, the fear that the things we love and rely upon can be turned against us. For audiences centuries removed from royal courts, the tension in these scenes feels instinctive. We understand on a primal level the betrayal inherent in a gift that kills or a weapon disguised as a tool. This motif transcends specific historical details to speak to a universal caution, reminding us to look beyond the surface, to question the intentions behind generosity, and to be wary of the vulnerabilities that come with comfort. The fact that nearly every culture has some version of this story, from ancient epics to modern thrillers, underscores its deep resonance. It suggests that our folklore and literature are not mere escapes from reality, but often repositories of its hardest lessons. They encode the traumas and anxieties of past ages, transforming the specific fear of a royal assassination by comb into a broader parable about deception, envy, and the corruption of beauty. Each retelling of Snow White, each performance of Hamlet, quietly passes down the understanding that danger often wears a lovely face, and that survival sometimes depends on suspecting the very hand that offers a rose. These stories ensure that the silent war of the ancient courts is never entirely forgotten. Its strategies preserved not in history books alone, but in the myths we tell our children, a lasting testament to the time when your most prized possession could indeed become your quiet, beautiful executioner. A dagger drawn in a crowded hall was not just an attack, it was a political statement. Overt assassination methods, from the ambush on a lonely road to the public poisoning of a shared feast, were acts of undeniable aggression. They ripped through the delicate fabric of court politics like a blade through silk, leaving a clear tear that demanded an immediate and forceful response. Such acts were declarations of war, unambiguous in their origin and intent, almost guaranteed to ignite cycles of violent retribution, destabilize entire regions, and brand the perpetrator as a treacherous enemy to all. The aftermath was a whirlwind of scandal, investigation, and swift justice. This was power expressed through brute force, a dangerous and often self-destructive gamble. The silent war waged with everyday artifacts operated on an entirely different, far more calculating principle. Its goal was not declaration but deception. Where the dagger created a martyr and a clear enemy, the poisoned comb created a mystery. The victim's passing, often after a slow and confusing illness, was a tragedy, not a scandal. It fostered an atmosphere of anxious uncertainty rather than righteous fury. This ambiguity was the method's greatest strategic asset. It provided the perpetrator with the ultimate shield, plausible deniability. While a court reeled from the loss, the architect of that loss could remain in the room, offering condolences, perhaps even leading the search for a cause, all while steering suspicion toward rivals, foreign agents, or simply the cruel hand of fate. This contrast reveals the cold calculus of ancient power at its most refined. The objective shifted from mere removal to removal without consequence. It was a longer, more patient game where success was measured not by the strength of your arm, but by the strength of your position after the deed was done. Could you eliminate a rival and still secure the favor of their allies? Could you shape the line of succession and be seen as its most loyal defender? The artifact-based kill made such sinister outcomes possible. It transformed murder from an act of violence into an act of political engineering, a silent edit to the story of power that left the editor's name conspicuously absent. In this light, the choice to use a perfumed glove over a pistol was not a matter of cowardice, but of supreme, chilling strategy, where the greatest victory was to commit the act and remain forever above suspicion. The impulse to turn the familiar into a weapon was a global phenomenon. Across vast oceans and towering mountain ranges, in courts that never knew of each other's existence, the same silent strategy emerged independently, like a dark echo of human ingenuity. In the Roman Empire, the strigil, a curved metal tool used to scrape oil and sweat from the skin after a bath, was an object of personal hygiene and social ritual. Yet, its sharp edge could be coated with a substance like cantharidin, derived from blister beetles, designed to be absorbed through the microscopic abrasions it created, leading to a slow and painful internal crisis easily misdiagnosed by physicians. Far to the east, in the scholarly courts of imperial China, the inkstone was a sacred object of contemplation. A rival could introduce a toxic compound like riulga, an arsenic sulfide, into the cake of ink. As the scholar ground his ink with water, day after day, preparing to write poetry or administrative decrees, he would unknowingly release a fine, poisonous dust into the air of his own study, inhaling his demise with each thoughtful breath. The palaces of Mesoamerica held their own perilous artifacts. An Aztec tezcatl or obsidian mirror, used for spiritual scrying and royal adornment, could have its polished back treated with toxic pastes from local plants. The ruler, seeking a vision from the gods in its reflective surface, might handle the mirror, allowing the poison to transfer to their hands and later to their food. This pattern is too consistent, too logically convergent to be coincidence. It points to a universal truth about closed systems of absolute power. When the stakes are the control of an empire and the environment is a gilded cage of intense scrutiny and limited access, the toolbox for removal becomes strangely standardized. You cannot march an army into the throne room. You cannot openly defy the ruler's guard. So you turn inward to the objects that already have permission to be there, that are already trusted. The specific item changed with the culture: a skin scraper, an inkstone, a mirror, but the underlying innovation was identical. It was a shared, dark adaptation, a chilling example of parallel evolution in the realm of political survival. This global perspective strips the practice of any exoticism. It was not the bizarre custom of one paranoid dynasty. but a repeated, logical response to a common problem. From Rome to China to Tenochtitlan, when humans built systems of concentrated power, they also, inevitably, engineered the quiet, domestic tools to dismantle them from within, proving that the most dangerous arms race is often the one fought with the contents of a dressing table or a writing desk. The psychological architecture of those ancient courts still shapes the security protocols of our modern world. When a world leader today receives a gift, it is not simply accepted. It passes through a gauntlet of scanners and chemical tests before it ever reaches their hands. This is not an overabundance of caution, but a direct inheritance from a time when the most beautiful box could hold a silent, patient end. The legacy of that pervasive fear has been institutionalized, evolving over centuries into the complex systems that protect heads of state and public figures in our era. Consider the modern equivalent of the royal food taster, a role still filled by dedicated security personnel who sample meals, a practice that continues in some official residences not merely as tradition, but as a last line of defense against a threat as old as power itself. Or reflect on the global anxiety sparked by incidents like anthrax-laced letters, where a mundane piece of mail, an object of daily trust, became a vector for harm, paralyzing postal systems and creating a new vocabulary of biosecurity. These contemporary fears are echoes, reverberations of the ancient understanding that the greatest danger often arrives disguised as routine. Our technology has advanced from hollow hairpins to microscopic pathogens and cyber threats, yet the core vulnerability remains strikingly human. We are psychologically wired to lower our guards around the familiar, to trust the letter, the gift, the meal prepared by a trusted staff. Modern security experts understand this intimately. Their threat assessments are built not just on lists of weapons, but on analyses of behavior, access, and the potential for everyday objects to be weaponized. The seemingly extreme measures, the motorcades, the secure compounds, the intense vetting of every person and parcel, are not born of paranoia in a vacuum. They are the accumulated wisdom, written in tragedy, of a long and bloody history where betrayal wore the face of a friend and a weapon looked exactly like a comb. This historical perspective allows us to view contemporary security not as theater, but as a continuous, silent dialogue with the past, where each new protocol is a lesson learned from a silent war we never stopped fighting. A poisoned victim in a film clutches their throat and falls within seconds, a dramatic end fit for the screen. Hollywood has painted a very specific and often misleading picture of these ancient silent weapons. The reality, stripped of cinematic flair, was far more patient, more uncertain, and in many ways more terrifying. The popular image of a villain dipping a ring into a wine glass to cause instant collapse is a dramatic exaggeration. The botanical and mineral poisons accessible to ancient alchemists were rarely so swift or reliable. Substances like arsenic, lead, or extracts from plants like wolfsbane typically worked through accumulation. They caused a gradual decline, a lingering illness that mimicked the fevers and wasting diseases common to the era. This slow action was not a flaw, it was a feature. It created the essential ambiguity that allowed the death to be recorded as natural causes. A ruler dying in their bed after weeks of sickness raised no alarm bells. A ruler collapsing at a banquet in front of hundreds would launch an immediate and furious investigation. The creation of a reliable delivery system was itself a monumental challenge, a feat of multidisciplinary engineering. It was not enough to simply have a poison. You needed a vessel that could store it undetected, release it controllably, and do so without harming the wrong person. Hollowing out a hairpin to hold a resin required a jeweler's precision. Treating a glove's lining without contaminating the entire workshop demanded a chemist's care. Designing a double-walled goblet that would leak its payload only after repeated uses was an exercise in fluid dynamics and material science. Each step carried immense risk of discovery. The artisan crafting the piece might talk. The court physician might recognize the symptoms from a previous case. A servant might notice a strange residue or an odd smell. Furthermore, these methods were notoriously difficult to target with perfect specificity. A poisoned book could be borrowed by a curious child. A treated gaming piece might be picked up by a favored friend instead of the intended rival. The plot could spectacularly backfire, eliminating an ally or even one's own family member. A tragic error with catastrophic political consequences. Separating the Hollywood myth from the historical reality does not make these acts less horrifying, it makes them more so. The true terror lies not in cartoonish villainy, but in the chilling patience and meticulous cruelty they represent. These were not crimes of passion performed with a dramatic flick of the wrist. They were acts of cold, calculated engineering, projects that could take months or years to plan and execute. The assassin had to be a strategist, a psychologist, and a project manager, overseeing a silent operation where success meant their work looked like absolutely nothing at all. This shift in perspective is crucial. It moves us from a simple story of good versus evil into the grayer, more complex territory of power dynamics, where innovation was harnessed for shadowy purposes, and the greatest threat was not a snarling enemy, but a trusted advisor offering a sympathetic smile and a beautifully wrapped, perfectly ordinary-looking box. The fiction offers a quick thrill, but the fact reveals a slow, silent corrosion of trust that is far more psychologically devastating. The true target of a weaponized comb was never just the person who used it. It was the mind of the person who feared it. To sit upon a throne in such an era was to live inside a beautiful, terrifying paradox. You were surrounded by unimaginable luxury, yet every symbol of that luxury was a potential sentence. The softest silk could scratch with invisible poison. The sweetest wine in the most ornate cup could hold a silent farewell. This reality transformed the experience of power from one of command into one of constant, quiet calculation. The psychological burden was immense and unrelenting. It was a low hum of dread beneath the fanfare of court life, a background radiation of suspicion that contaminated every human connection. Who in this gilded world was truly loyal? Was your most trusted general offering strategic advice or subtly guiding you toward a battlefield where an accident might occur? Was your queen's affectionate adjustment of your cloak a gesture of love or a chance to secure a treated pin? Even the innocent laughter of a child could be viewed through a lens of terrifying possibility, as rival lines of succession made family itself a source of profound vulnerability. This environment forced rulers into impossible choices. One path led toward a defensive tyranny. Consumed by the fear of plots, a monarch might begin to see enemies in every shadow. They would preemptively remove anyone who showed even a hint of ambition, trusting no counsel and ruling through pure, isolated paranoia. History remembers such figures as cruel despots, but their cruelty was often born from a world that had taught them every smile could hide a secret. The other path led toward a kind of luxurious paralysis. Knowing that any decision, any preference for a certain food or a certain jeweler could be exploited, a ruler might retreat into inaction. They would become a prisoner of their own protocols, allowing factions to grow powerful around them because to engage was to risk offering a hand that might be poisoned. The weaponized artifact, therefore, achieved its most devastating effect long before it was ever employed. Its mere existence in the realm of possibility was enough to warp behavior, corrupt trust, and turn the highest office in the land into a state of siege. The greatest damage was not the physical act, but the silent, corrosive fear that made a monarch doubt every kindness and interrogate every gift, proving that the most effective terror is the kind you are left to imagine for yourself. Ambition was a quiet flame that could only burn in the dark. To openly challenge a king was to invite immediate and total destruction. a lesson written in the blood of failed rebellions. The courtier who chose a poisoned comb over a drawn sword was not necessarily a coward, but often a pragmatist trapped in a system with no honorable exits. Their motive was rarely a thirst for chaos, but a desperate bid for control within a rigid, perilous hierarchy. They sought to remove a single piece from the board without overturning the table, preserving the very structure they hoped to ascend. This could be driven by personal vengeance for a slight that could never be publicly addressed, by the ideological conviction that a different ruler would save the kingdom, or by the cold terror of knowing they themselves were next on a rival's list. In some of the most tragic cases, the hand that prepared the toxin was not acting from personal ambition at all, but was coerced, with their own family held as silent hostages to ensure their cooperation. The choice of an everyday artifact as the weapon reveals a profound insight into this mindset. It was the instrument of the ultimate insider, someone who understood the routines, the intimacies, and the unspoken rules of the court. They weren't an invading enemy, they were a part of the furniture, making their betrayal not an assault from without, but a collapse from within. This forces upon us a grim and uncomfortable moral calculus. From our modern vantage point, such an act seems the height of treachery, a violation of the most basic trust. Yet, placed within the context of a game where the penalty for losing was often the complete eradication of one's lineage, the lines blur. Was it more moral to march soldiers to a bloody public battle that would cost thousands of common lives, or to orchestrate a single, silent change at the top? Was it cowardice to avoid a fight you were guaranteed to lose, or was it a cunning adaptation to survive another day? To even ask these questions is not to justify the poisoning of a sleeping child or the slow murder of a queen through her makeup. Those acts remain, by any measure, profound evils, but understanding the pressure cooker of fear, ambition, and survival that generated them complicates our view of history in a vital way. It moves us beyond the simple categories of hero and villain, and into the murky, human realm of impossible choices made under desperate circumstances. It reminds us that history is not a story of monsters and saints, but of people, flawed and fearful, navigating systems of power that often rewarded the darkest forms of ingenuity. To judge them is easy. To understand the world that made their choices seem logical, even necessary, is the harder and perhaps more important task. A jade comb rests under museum glass, labeled simply as a personal grooming object from the Ming dynasty. For the visitor, it is a beautiful artifact, a silent testament to craftsmanship and daily life centuries ago. They see the intricate carving, imagine it held in a noblewoman's hand, and move on to the next display case. They have no idea they might be looking at a murder weapon. This is the profound ethical crossroads where modern curators stand, holding the silent witnesses to history's secret wars. The question is not just what these objects are, but how we should speak for them now. Do we attach a label that reads, "This comb is suspected of delivering a slow-acting neurotoxin to its owner," or do we let its beauty tell a simpler, safer story? There is no easy answer. On one side of the debate, scholars argue that to omit the darker potential is to whitewash history. It sanitizes the past, presenting a version of ancient life scrubbed clean of its brutal political realities. A comb displayed only as an ornament tells a half-truth. It erases the lived experience of fear, the constant vulnerability, and the chilling innovation that defined life at the pinnacle of power. To understand these societies fully, we must confront the fact that their artistic genius and their capacity for concealed cruelty were often two sides of the same coin. The object itself is a document, and its full story, however uncomfortable, is the one we are ethically bound to preserve and present. The counterargument is equally compelling. Labeling an object as a suspected murder weapon risks crossing into sensationalism. It could transform a hall of historical understanding into a chamber of horrors, reducing complex individuals to mere victims and their possessions to morbid curiosities. There is a deep responsibility to respect the memory of the person who may have been harmed by the item. Is it respectful to reduce their legacy to the instrument of their passing? Furthermore, without absolute forensic proof, which is vanishingly rare, such a label traffics in speculation. It could be presenting historical rumor as established fact, which undermines the museum's core mission of education based on evidence. The curator's dilemma, then, is a tightrope walk between historical integrity and modern sensitivity, between telling the full truth and avoiding the glorification of ancient acts of harm. This debate is about more than museum plaques. It is about how we, as a society, choose to narrate the darker chapters of human ingenuity. Do we highlight the technological cleverness of a double-walled goblet, or do we emphasize the betrayal and loss it was designed to enact? The most thoughtful approach may lie not in a choice, but in a layered conversation. Perhaps the comb is displayed for its beauty, but its accompanying digital record or an audio guide delves deeper, presenting the documented rumors, the forensic analysis of its materials, and the historical context of court intrigues. This allows visitors to engage with the complexity at their own pace, to first appreciate the artifact as art, and then, if they choose, to understand it as a potential instrument of a silent war. In this way, the museum becomes not just a keeper of objects, but a facilitator of dialogue with the past. It acknowledges that these silent witnesses hold multiple truths within their forms, a beauty that captivates the eye and a history that, when listened to, whispers cautionary tales about power, trust, and the unsettling ways human innovation can be bent to the darkest of purposes. The final lesson we take from them depends entirely on the questions we are brave enough to ask. Hannah Arendt's concept finds a chilling precursor in these silent weapons. Her observations on the modern bureaucratic machine, where horrific outcomes emerge from a series of small, thoughtless actions, have a strange and ancient echo here. In the courts of old, we see not the banality of thoughtlessness, but the banality of meticulous, creative purpose. The evil was not a roaring flame, but a slow, cold seep. It existed in the quiet decision to hollow out a hairpin, in the patient act of mixing a toxin into a perfumed sachet, in the careful realignment of a gemstone on a ring. This was evil made mundane, woven into the very rituals of waking, dressing, eating, and playing. It required no grand villainy, only a sustained willingness to corrupt the innocent. A craftsperson's skill in joinery, an alchemist's understanding of botany, a jeweler's eye for detail, all these creative, human talents could be quietly diverted into a pipeline of silent harm. The true darkness lies in that diversion, in the moment innovation is severed from conscience. It reveals a capacity not for sudden rage, but for sustained, calculated corrosion. This history, then, is not an invitation to view every toothbrush or coffee mug in our own homes with suspicion. That would be to miss the point entirely. Instead, it is a call for a deeper kind of awareness. It asks us to recognize that the objects we design, the systems we build, the technologies we embrace are never neutral. They are extensions of our values. The comb was not evil, the intent behind its modification was. The lesson is not about the artifact, but about the human hand that reshapes it. When creativity, intellect, and will are applied without the counterweight of empathy or an ethical framework, the results can be quietly catastrophic. They can turn the most ordinary elements of life into instruments of a silent, patient betrayal. So let the final takeaway be this: look around you. See not potential weapons, but testaments to human ingenuity. Then ask the most important question of all: what values are we, right now, weaving into the fabric of our own daily lives? Our journey through the hidden arsenal of history ends not with a bang, but with a whisper, the silent echo of a comb against hair, the faint scent of a glove, the cool touch of a ring. We have seen how innocence was meticulously crafted into instrumentality, transforming the most personal artifacts of royal life into vehicles for a quiet, patient conclusion. These stories, however, are far more than a catalogue of clever murder plots. They are a mirror held up to the very nature of concentrated power, reflecting its profound, inherent vulnerabilities. A system that places ultimate authority in one person also creates a single, irresistible target, and the walls built to protect that target inevitably become the walls of a gilded cage. Within that cage, paranoia becomes the mother of terrifying ingenuity, and human innovation reveals its dark twin, a capacity for cruelty that is just as creative, just as patient, and just as brilliant as our capacity for art or medicine. This history compels us to look beyond the grand narratives of treaties and battles. It asks us to listen to the intimate details, the textures of daily life where the deadliest intentions were so often concealed. The true record of an era is written not only on parchment, but in the residue on a cup, the construction of a hairpin, the choice of a die. To understand the past fully, we must learn to read these silent, material witnesses. So let this exploration be a reminder to look beyond the surface in your own world. Question the stories objects tell, consider the hands that made them, and recognize the immense power we grant to the familiar. If you found this dive into historical mysteries fascinating, consider subscribing for more journeys into the past's hidden corners. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please share which of these weaponized artifacts shocked or intrigued you the most in the comments below. Thank you for watching.